wherever I went, I was given the message that I was, again, the celebrity freak. They would either scream in horror or applaud.
Right after college, Sally Schwager booked a one-way flight to Japan, speaking no Japanese, to act in ancient Japanese theater. She became, in her own words, a celebrity freak. In this episode, she talks about how she shed that identity and found her heart's work as a therapist back in Manhattan. This is Marcia Heath. Welcome to B-SideTales. After college, you packed your bag and you're headed to Japan. And I wonder about that decision. That's not an A-Side conventional choice for someone who's just graduated from college with your degree. So how did that happen?
My last semester of college, I had a really inspiring teacher, a young new teacher who came into our theater department and taught a course on Asian dance and drama. And it really fired me up, Asian forms, like we studied what was going on in theater in Japan and in Bali and Indonesia and in Thailand. And suddenly, like, the whole world of theater seemed much more bigger, because these were places where people were engaging in theater as healing for their communities and ways for people to come together. I got just very excited about the potential of what theater could be beyond what I had thought of it as. So, I mean, it was super naive. I just thought Japan was a place where I could go and, as a Caucasian person, teach English and support myself. I flew into Osaka. I mean, people always say to me, like, wow, that's so brave of you, to just pick up and to go to Japan on a one-way ticket. But really, I feel like it was very naive. I didn't even know what to be afraid of in doing something like that. I was just very fired up about studying this form of theater, which was based in Osaka, which is like the Pittsburgh of Japan, right? So I flew into Osaka, which was like a city under perpetual construction. I didn't know a word of Japanese. I even bought my ticket, and then, I mean, it's embarrassing. I looked up in an atlas, I looked up Japan, and I went, it's an island. Because I really just didn't know. So anyway, I went to Japan and ended up staying there a total of 12 years.
How did the society around you react to your decision to take off and go to this island?
My father, who tends to loom large in my stories, was very excited. He was excited about my learning Japanese as a marketable skill. So this was a time when Japan was sort of an economic juggernaut too. There was a lot going on in Japan in terms of management, manufacturing techniques. The friends that I had graduated college with were all moving to New York City to audition for yogurt commercials, trying to be on soap operas and being in TV, right? So to him, that didn't seem like a good idea in terms of being able to make money and because acting is hard. It is hard. I mean, I often wonder, like, when I look back, it's like if I had stayed with acting, would I be a career waitress by now? Or I don't know. I don't know exactly. When I got there, it was very hard, because I was not expecting that level of culture shock. I hadn't really been away from home before, and I went to the other side of the planet. One of those layers is, I think, to get away from my dad, and yet he still lived in me, right? He still does, of course.
So you landed in Japan, culture shock galore. What's an example of a daily event that at first really shocked you or unhinged you when you moved to Japan?
I got there, I went to the airport concierge and found a businessman's hotel and kind of went there for as many days as I could afford to stay there. And everything about it, just everything, just the protocol with slippers and shoes, taking off shoes. And I remember making a woman scream in horror because I wore indoor shoes outdoors. I didn't even know the word gaijin. I'm now fluent in Japanese, but the word gaijin means foreigner. It's gai is outside person. And I was not prepared for the extent to which I was from every angle, right? Even from behind, I am a gaijin, I'm a foreigner. And it was a time when there were many fewer foreigners in Japan. It was 1983. So this is a long time ago. I remember coming around a corner and kind of, almost when you almost bump into someone and someone, would kind of screech, like, ah, like a monster, right? There was always a little bit of that feeling. of being both a celebrity, because I was Caucasian, and a little bit of a freak. I ended up moving to Kyoto, which is a beautiful city that was not bombed during the war and rebuilt as the other cities were. So I lived there, and I eventually got a small grant to study the No Theater, N-O-H. I studied with a National Living Treasure, which is a wonderful system that Japan, they give this title to artists and special people. It was such an extraordinary experience to be able to see, because women were not allowed, Japanese women couldn't study this theater, because in Japanese theater, only a man can play a woman to perfection. Like there's, the misogyny is so deep in this culture, right? So that's one way it played. And also this was also a long time ago. I don't believe this is true anymore. But because I was a foreigner, I didn't count. So I could study. So it was an honor and also a dismissal at the same time. I studied for him for years. He would eventually take me around with him to perform, to his performances. And we'd be on these 1,000-year-old stages, right? You could sort of smell and feel the texture of the wood on the floor. For 1,000 years, people have been dancing on these stages. He would do his performance, and then he would say, and now for something really different. And then he would sort of trot me out, and I would do a dance. The kind of theater, it's a system of movement and vocalization that you have to learn, you memorize, and then you perform it. And the people in the audience would just, they would laugh. I felt like like a dancing seal a little bit.
You say dancing seal. It strikes me that you were a quote unquote foreigner, a woman, somewhat of a cultural misfit because you were from the United States. And yet there you are getting into the thick of ancient cultural traditions in Japan. And I wonder to what extent at the time you felt like a revolutionary or someone unconventionally interesting, or whether it just kind of flowed from where you were.
Did I feel like I was unconventionally interesting?
Yes, that you were doing something kind of radically bold and courageous at the time.
But that's such an interesting question. No one has ever asked me that question. On the one hand, I was Caucasian, right? And it was a time in Japan where Japanese beauty culture looked to the West for beauty. They did not think they were beautiful, but they thought we were beautiful. Like if you looked at fashion magazines at the time, again, early 80s, all of the models were Caucasian. The biggest operation, the Japanese women were having this operation on their eyelids, right, to give themselves more of a big-eyed Caucasian look. Wherever I went, I was given the message that I was, again, the celebrity freak. They would either scream in horror or applaud. This is part of why I felt like I had to leave. Yes, after 12 years, it's a long time. But I felt like I was needing to grow in different ways. I needed to be seen differently than these two big ways that I was seen there. I was also a little bit of a minor celebrity, because by the time I left, I had a radio show in Tokyo. It was a show about teaching English, and it was on many times a day. The whole country was wanting to learn English, right? That was part of it also. That was part of the specialness.
I want to know how you came up with that idea and also made it happen.
The pool of people who had my skills and talents in terms of being able to speak English was small, right? There weren't a lot of people there. And because I was doing theater, I was adjacent to those kinds of worlds. And there was NHK. NHK is like the PBS of Japan. It was a show that had been ongoing, and they were looking for new stars, one male and one female lead for the show. So I auditioned.
And you got it out of a pool of probably many auditioners, I would think.
Yes, I think so. I remember that audition. It was like a radio drama that went for a whole year, and every year it was a different theme with this man and woman. And I also did animal voices, and I did all the female voices and the sounds if a dog had to bark or something like that. And it was a show about Route 66. It was a couple that was traveling down Route 66 in America. In the audition, I haven't thought about this for decades, they asked me if I knew the song, and I really didn't, but I pretended that I did, and I just full volume just sang some version of Get Your Kicks on Route 66, right? And they told me right there, you're hired.
Oh my goodness. So you had that spunkiness to improvise. And in a way, your whole experience in Japan was one big improvisation from the start.
When I started studying the theater, I was learning language that was archaic. It would be like if you went to England and studied Shakespeare and sort of learned, Shakespearean language. I was learning Japanese, but I was mixed up between what was archaic and what was modern. So I was going into the 7-Eleven and like, greetings, kinsman, right? Like, dost thou stockpile aspirin in thy establishment? Stuff like that. And Japanese their eyes would go like this, but the Japanese would never correct you because it was impolite. So they would join me in my archaic English. I actually studied a pocket of no called kyogen, which is the comic version of no. The grant I won said I could study no, and then in parentheses, or kyogen. Kyogen are plays, they're little tiny 20-minute situational comedies that are put between no plays as a palate cleanser. So when I started dipping into this comedy, like all this like Lucille Ball came out in me. It was like a good form for me.
So now I'm thinking of another twist. So you've been in Japan 12 years, and now it's time to go back to the United States. In a way, you started living on the B side, an unconventional side, right away after college, which is fairly unusual. Usually people flip to that after they're burned out on another traditional path. So now you're back in the United States. And in a way, you're returning to a more conventional world where you're not an automatic celebrity. You don't stand out as a Caucasian. How was that transition for you?
Brutal. It was so horrible. And the thing is, I was feeling uncomfortable in Japan because the thing about Japanese people is if you go there as a foreigner and you don't speak their language and food falls off your chopsticks and you can't sleep on a futon and you don't know about them, they fall over themselves to be good hosts. Like they love that. It reinforces some idea they have of you. But when you move in and became quite fluent in the language and are really comfortable with all of these inscrutable customs, I felt the walls go up more. The longer I was there and the more comfortable I was in the culture, the harder I felt it was to be there. So that's part of why I left. And I chose New York City because I didn't know anybody there. I thought, wow, this is going to be a real fresh start. I went there and I was nobody. Taxi drivers did not recognize my voice from this radio show. I felt like I could have walked naked down Fifth Avenue and nobody would have even blinked. So it was really a shock to my system. Imagine 12 years of this kind of specialness around you. I went into a massive depression. I didn't know who I was. I lost my identity. What happened is one day I ran into a neighbor I knew, said, how you doing? I was probably crying. I said, not good, not good. And later they put a little note under my door. Don't know you that well, but I'm seeing this therapist that I think is really good. Started therapy, and very, very quickly I said, oh, this is what I want to do. When I came home, my father was encouraging me to apply for jobs at Japanese banks and places where this skill of the Japanese language would be appreciated and valued. So I started actually applying for jobs, and my depression got worse. I was a little sick of Japanese people and that way of being in relation to them that did not feel like I was really being seen as who I was. I start therapy, and very quickly, I think, imagine being able to bring your heart to work every day in this way. That's me. So I started training to be a therapist. So that was another big shift.
And you're still a therapist.
And I'm still a therapist, and I'm still studying. I'm constantly training in different modalities because I love the way doing the work brings so much richness to the study, and doing the study brings so much richness to the work.
I hear a theme throughout of kind of following your own values and your own interests and being very individual.
So another little flip of B-side, in 2006, I went to seminary and became a minister.
Okay, so how is that B-side, given that you were on that side already as a practicing therapist. How is that a sort of a flip to something very different from what you were doing? I'm very curious about that.
I don't know that I'm a real B-sider in that sense. I feel like I'm always just refining the B-side for myself. I don't see it so much as a flip. The most B-side is that story of like I went into college as an economics major, but that was 5 minutes, you know, in the context of a life. And you know, pretty quickly I said, this isn't for me. So it's complicated, right? Like when I was in Japan, even coming back 12 years later, my father's message of like, you need an A-side job was so strong in me that I was actually, you know, interviewing at Japanese banks looking for a 9-to-5 administrative assistant job, right? When that was so not me. But I didn't spend too much time there.
What I think really fits about your story is that you didn't have this massive risk-taking flip from A to B, and yet you've had several B-sides that have evolved and changed. And I think that message is true. I mean, this is not a one-time flip to the B-side and suddenly you're happy the rest of your life. You have to keep playing and doing improvisations and experimenting. I think that's a very clear angle in your story.
Yes, I like that. I think that's a real nuance in what you're trying to do.
Yes. I think people will really relate.
Because I was really trying to unstitch my family of origin message, which was a strong message, from the fabric of me. Make sense?
Yes.
So emotionally it was hard, and I would many times slip back, right? And to this day have fear about finances. It's baked in, my father's poverty, even when it doesn't need to be. And those feel like the risks, is to look for what feels authentically joyful for me instead of the conveyor belt version of me that would please my father.
So what do you think your father would reflect on you as his daughter? What would he say about where you are now in your life?
I remember when I first started working as a therapist, every time I would see him at family occasions, the only thing he would ask about me is, how many clients are you seeing? Which meant, how much money are you making? And sometimes he would ask, what do you charge, right? Like that was his sole interest in this thing I was doing, like sitting with people and like touching souls, you know? There were so many more interesting things to ask them. So I remember that bothered me that he would do that. I like to think now that he's in a much more expanded and less fearful place himself and is proud of me and understands this.
I so relate to that story about your father and asking about how many clients. My father too emphasized money and security and never really understood what I did at all. But I came to understand that was just his fear, and that he loved me and probably respected me as best he could. And so I've expanded in my view of his narrowing of my life.
Well said. I mean, I could say exactly the same. Yeah. I went to seminary in 2006, and I went to an interfaith seminary. I wouldn't have gone to Christian or rabbinical school or anything like that, but people say, oh, wow, you went to seminary, you must love God. But I really went because I didn't know what my relationship with God was, and it felt like it was a really big topic to inquire into. So I found an interfaith seminary in Manhattan that I actually ended up working for later, doing a program there. But as part of our training, we had to do some kind of volunteer work, and it could be, as a therapist, I could give free sessions, or I could do anything. But I had a very good friend there who said, let's do something juicy. And so we got interested in restorative justice work. And we just happened to find a program that was just starting called Long-Termers Responsibility Project. So we trained for about, I don't know, a couple of months. In fact, I was trained by Kathy Boudin. Like, she was part of the Weather Underground, the Brinks heist. They were political revolutionaries. She said we were going to change the world through guns. And she drove the getaway car during a big heist in Nyack, New Jersey, when two police officers got killed. She went to prison, and she went through this restorative justice process to kind of heal herself. And eventually, after, I don't know, maybe 40 years, actually got out of prison. And then she was the one that trained me. And then we went into prisons in the area and worked with long-termers, so only people who had been convicted of murder. The whole idea was to help them come to greater remorse, to feel remorse, and also take more responsibility for the impact of the crimes that they had committed. And it was super, super, some of the work I felt more passionate about. In fact, that stopped during COVID also. And I'm sorry not to be doing that anymore.
What's an example of what you learned that you were able to use in your own life?
I didn't feel separate from them, as I worked with them and got closer and closer. But there is this big difference, is that they have committed these horrific, horrific crimes. So I asked myself a lot, well, how am I like them, right? Because that's part of what, in this work, we're trying to build bridges. Like the very first question that we work with people is around what happened to them in their own childhoods. Because to actually take someone else's life, you have to be numb. And to be numb, something terrible must have happened to you. So I've heard some of the worst stories I've heard about childhood, right? So in this work, we're constantly asking them to make connections about what happened to them in the past, what's happening to them now, like how are they choosing to do their time, and what happened around the communities that they lived in, like taking just greater and greater responsibility. So I started to look at, well, the biggest violence in my life is violence that I sort of do toward myself, and it's in my own head, and it's very private. So I started to just the way I was asking these guys to do the hardest work possible. The worst people in prison are the correctional officers. They would like mock me when they saw me coming. They'd be like, ready for some rehabilitation. They were terrible, but they would have never had the courage to do the work that these guys had done. Taking responsibility, right? Not trying to get away from it, not trying to minimize the crime, but taking full responsibility. I took a life. So I really internalized that message a bit myself. I mean, I try to on an ongoing basis, and ask the question, am I taking responsibility for how I treat myself? Because so much of it is unconscious. It's so knee-jerk, it's so learned. That's the first thing that comes up, right? This idea of what it means to really take responsibility. To own my own perpetrator, actually. To own her.
So I have one weirdo last question for you. As someone who performed on stage and got lots of applause and didn't mind being the center of attention, do you ever miss that, or do you have other outlets for being an outgoing kind of showboaty person?
It's also a great question. I don't know, it's not a flip to B-side. What is it? It's like the needle is moving through the record and it's getting refined.
Yes, the groove is getting deeper.
I've done a bit of corporate consulting over the last few decades too, working in a modality called interactive theater. So we were traveling, a group of us all over the world, and mostly doing DEI work, actually, which now is diversity, equity, and inclusion, yes. Right? Which is now like completely like uncool, right? With this administration, I mean, there is no more work. It's tragic. But we were, helping people. We did sexual harassment, all kinds of issues, change management. But we used theater. So we would go in, do an assessment, find out the company's or the organization's issues, write a script, and I did a lot of the script writing, and then go in and act with actors and show them themselves. That was the training. So we would show them a dysfunctional scene that looked like them, and then we would bring in participants from the group, the managers or whatever, and have them try to manage the dysfunctional team of actors, right? So in a way, I have been doing a lot of acting, but in a very narrow sort of teaching therapeutic kind of way. And I had this idea that I would maybe write a piece, like a one-woman piece about speaking from each of those consciousnesses. I love the idea of things that are both educational and entertaining. Like imagine if it could be wildly funny and you really learn something too.
I would go to your premiere in a second, no matter where I was in the world. I have the sense that we could talk for days and your stories would be equally interesting. Well, thank you, Sally. And I hope I know we'll stay in touch. And It's really a delight to meet you.
Yeah, likewise, Marcia. This is a wonderful, it's a very inspiring project. I feel inspired by you.
Oh, well, thank you. And also in return. Sally found her life's work in her 30s after giving up a celebrity identity that felt false. I recently spoke with David Jacobson, who gave up a celebrity career in New York as a cartoonist to pursue glassblowing in rural Maine. Click on the icon on the screen to find out what David lost and what he found on the other side.